But one thing I want to say first, it's interesting listening to the stuff earlier. From me, you won't get out intellectual. What comes to me is from a working class family. It's what I learned from my grandparents. And a lot of what was being spoken about by Jason in particular was the stuff I grew up through. So I'll maybe try and relate some of that. I do, however, want to talk about one thing that you raised that I have a grave concern about. Now, I think it's time for trade unions to look at maybe disaffiliating from Labour Party, certainly reducing the amount of funds they give to Labour Party, but a campaign to opt out of the political fund is a very, very dangerous thing to do. The political fund isn't just about affiliation to Labour Party. We in ASLEF, we run campaigns like freight on rail, getting freight on rail if we think it's better for the environment. You wouldn't be able to run a campaign like that without an identified political fund. So I understand the sentiment, but please, when you talk about disaffiliation from Labour Party, you do it in your union, through your union structures and your union's rules. Don't go to your conferences trying to do away with the political fund. That will stop all political campaigning by your trade union, not just party political campaigning. That's why the Tories introduced it. That's why every 10 years we have to have a ballot of our membership to keep it. Please understand the difference between the political levy and support for the Labour Party. Now, next Saturday, I'm here this Saturday, next Saturday, it's great being retired. Next Saturday, I'm going to be at a place called the Red Shed in Wakefield. I don't know if you know about it. It's literally a red shed. It's a Labour club, and it's opposite what was where the Tories club was. And the Tory club in Wakefield was a big Victorian building. The Red Shed's still there more than 50 years later. The Tory club's gone. And I'm going to be proud to be speaking there in defence of a great trade unionist called Paul Holmes. Yeah. He's been elected as the president of Unison. He's suspended from Unison. His whole branch is suspended. Unison comrades have got a great left-wing executive being elected. They need to be supported. That's a positive thing for movement. Paul is also suspended and has been for 22 months from Kirklees Council where he works. Now, he's a great comrade, I have a lot of respect for him, and I'll be proud to speak there in support of him at the Red Shed next Saturday. And that's something to look at. When we look at Sharon Graham's election in Unite, the fact that the right winger came bottom of the three, that is something for us to take and be positive about. Now, there's a guy from Doncaster, there was a strike in Doncaster, or just outside Doncaster, a number of years ago, maybe 15 years ago, at Superdrug, a place called Southampton. I don't know if you remember the dispute. And there's a young guy who I met through that, took him under his wing a little bit. I took him to Parliament with ASLEF a number of times. A young kid, and he stepped up to the mark. The union reps who were there weren't up to the job. This young kid just naturally took leadership on. He took it there, it was great. He now works as a full-time organiser for Unite, and he works under Sharon Graham, and he was telling me all along, I can't understand why they're not supporting her. I don't know any more than that, but I know the left getting the top two positions in election at Unite has to be good for the movement. Yeah. I also know what's happened on the executive of Unison, and with Paul Holmes being elected as president, the fact that the right wing are not wanting them to take up office and they're trying everything they can, that shows there's militancy in the trade union movement still, and we should all stand and support them in any way we can, however big or small. It's also great to be back with my old mate Chris Williamson from the Democracy Roadshow that we did. Do you know, and did it say something about the Labour Party? When a brickie from Derby and a train driver from Donny can get on a couple of motorbikes and they shit themselves, didn't they? Yeah. They shit themselves, things went mad. It was unbelievable. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Just one thing to say about that. Chris, I love Harleys, I rebuild them, I restore them. Chris had never been on a bike before. We're on a private road and I sat him on the bike and I said, look, I assume you've seen the Democracy Roadshow. I showed him how to set off and off he went. And I thought, fuck, I haven't told him how to stop. But anyway, we got through it all right. And I think we made an impression. Was it the Daily Politics or something that showed the full thing? I mean, you were on there, so it was good. Now, a lot of what we're listening to is what I grew up to. I was born into trade union movement. I was brought up by my grandfather. Brief history. When I was 3, my mum left us. She was suffering from postnatal depression, it seemed, at the time. Never to see her or my sister again. My dad died when I was 11. I found him dead when I was 11. He had a brain hemorrhage. He was a rocker and a boozer and a fighter with my dad. So I was brought up then by my grandparents. My grandfather was born in 1907, he was a miner. Moved south for work, come to Scotland, to Durham coalfield where he met my grandmother, and then to Yorkshire coalfield. He had a serious back injury in a roof fall at Armthorpe, Markham Main Colliery, and then he ended up, finished his working life as a green card job with a brush and a barrow in plant works at Doncaster. My dad was a fitter and turner in plant works, so it makes me like a third generation rail worker, I suppose. But my granddad giving me politics, he brought me up in it when we were talking about the lights going out in the 70s. He sat, we both stood at the gate at the council house in Intake in Doncaster where we lived, watching the lights go out and thinking it was great. Remembering the miners saying just before that election, if Labour get elected, we'll call the strike off. And we're laughing at the things I grew up with, stuff like that. They talked about Saltley Gate. One of the inspirations at Saltley Gate, one of the guys who did a lot to help organise it, was a guy called Frank Watters, a communist organiser, Communist Party organiser. He also worked for Morning Star for a while. He was my granddad's mate. He's somebody, when I start getting involved and start getting positions, he used to come with me. I always had to buy his whiskey for him, and I never got the right amount of water in his whiskey. That's why I drink mine without any water, to be quite honest. But he'd tell me everything I'd done wrong. Frank Watters, a great guy. I come to Birmingham, last time I was in Birmingham probably was to his funeral, to be quite honest. So great. But my granddad taught me all the stuff. He told me about, now he was born in 1926 general strike. He told me about it. And he used to tell me about it, usually when he'd had a few pints, and he'd tell me about the soup kitchens that they had. They did that so I'd never see it. He told me about people waiting at the pit gates, at factory gates, at the docks, hoping to be picked for work. They got rid of that so I'd never see it. He told me about the horrible thing, the brutality of the state. He told me about, during 1926 strike, in the village where he lived, the coppers coming into a miner's cottage. His wife, he used the language of the day. His wife was an invalid. She was bedridden. And the coppers came in. She was screaming, terrified, as you'd imagine. And what happens? A copper swipes, hit her across the face with his stick, saying, "Take that, you parish-fed bastard." These are the stories I grew up with, so I knew about the brutality of the state. It's not a surprise to me. But all those things my granddad told me about, we'd never see, we're seeing them all now. They're not stood at a factory gate, or at the pit gates, there's no pits left, is there? Or at the docks. They're waiting for a text message coming through on 0 hours contracts. That's where we need to be organising as a trade union. We talk about the key workers through this horrible pandemic. Yes, the NHS workers, key workers, transport workers who have kept things moving, key workers. You know, some of the most vulnerable workers we have right now are out on little scooters and things delivering food for you. And we need to organise them. They're very vulnerable out on streets. We need to organise them. They're the people where we need to be in there and working with them. Now, I went to Batley and Spen. Before I do, just one thing about my granddad as well. He didn't just tell me about how bad stuff was. He used to tell me with pride about after the war, 1945, the building of more than 1 million council houses. You know, nationalising the pits and the railways, the National Health Service, the welfare state. These council houses weren't just built. People had secure tenancies for their lifetime, often passed on to the next generation. The houses were maintained by people who had proper employment. You know, whether they be brickies, like Chris, whether they be plumbers, glazers, painters and decorators, they were all employed, directly employed, proper contracts, proper holiday work, holiday leave, everything was there for them. And you know, I worked alongside when I was starting on railway and getting to the stage where I needed to get an house of my own, where people on the same salary, same wage, just chose whether they wanted to buy a house or have a council house. There was nothing wrong with it. It was seen as quite normal to choose a council house. In fact, I bought, a single bloke bought a two-down terraced house, and it cost me less paying a mortgage than it did for people to have a council house. But it was there and secure for them. That's not there anymore. So he told me about the positives as well. Anyway, went to Batley and Spen. Nicky and I, we'd been up on our motorbike touring the Shetland Islands, stopping at Dunbar, talking to people there in Scotland who were socialists but would never vote Labour, they were telling us. Talking to people on Shetland who were socialists because the Shetland Islands Lib Dems, one of them had been a councillor, a Lib Dem councillor, but classed herself as a socialist, but they wouldn't touch Labour with a barge pole. We come down, stopped a couple of days at Sea Houses in North East on way back. Very similar situation. And what Labour have done, they've thrown away a chance, because you know what we had? In 2017, we had our 1945 moment. We had our chance. And those bastards, the traitors, the turncoats who worked against us, who worked against that election, we were within about 2,500 votes in the right place of getting in office on such a fantastic manifesto. And they worked against it. We won't see the Ford report. I don't think we'll ever see that. And one of the worst things, I believe, Chris became a victim of it, the weaponisation of anti-Semitism. I became an internationalist, partly through things my grandfather told me, but also I was heavily involved in the anti-apartheid movement. And you know, we did have people then telling us, you shouldn't be getting involved in issues beyond our shores. You know, it's not something, you're supporting terrorists, supporting people like Mandela who are supporting terrorists. We had all that. But we saw South Africa free. We saw the end of apartheid. I'll never forget seeing Mandela and de Klerk walking down that street. Mandela, a tall, proud man, and de Klerk like he'd got the weight of the world on his shoulders, and quite right, he should have had as well. So we saw that. But one thing we never had to fight when we were fighting South African apartheid was the Labour Friends of South Africa. You couldn't have imagined it. Now we have a Labour Friends of Apartheid Israel. How come? How can any party that has the slightest pretence of being there to represent working people support an apartheid state like Israel? How? It's not possible, and there's something drastically wrong in that. So anyway, after that journey, we've been talking to people in Scotland and in the northeast of England, and we've got this impression of, listen, if you have any doubt about it, Labour is dead in Scotland. It's finished. And I think the appointment of Jim Murphy, was it, as leader, was the final straw for him up there. And I think the northeast and Yorkshire and places, it's probably going to go the same way, I believe, because of their stance on Brexit. I'm proud that ASLEF supported Brexit. We sat in the executive committee room, we made a decision. I think my personal view, I don't know about Andy, I thought when we got to conference we'd get turned over. We didn't. About 2/3 in favour and supported us. We were in touch with a membership on that issue. We were right. 2017, the policy was we're going to abide by the decision. We will respect the decision of the referendum. By 2019, we all know what Starmer had changed. And you know, I'm sick to death. It's great to look round here and see people in normal clothes. People that looks like a cross-section of society. Because I don't know about you, but when I'm out and about in Doncaster or wherever, I don't see loads of people in blue suits, pointy shoes and fucking hair products all over. I don't see it. And Parliament should represent the people it represents. It should look like the people it represents. It should talk like the people it represents. I don't know how these people manage to lose their accents when they get there. You know, now, I'm not intellectual. I can barely read and write, to be quite honest. I got to be a train driver because when I was taking my exams, it was an oral exam. I'd never have done it if it was like this. But when we talk about the miners, we talk about rail workers and the unions and how you organise. It wasn't just about organising in the workplace. They organised in the communities. The brass bands, if you go to Durham Miners Gala, the brass bands, that was something organised by the unions, the sports clubs, cricket clubs, football clubs. Everything was done. That even before the National Health Service, with the work of the NUM, there was healthcare for the mining communities where they all paid in a little bit for it. That's what we have to do. In the railway it was the same. We had the BRSA clubs. We had a thing, and this comes on to what you were talking about, Jason, about these, what did you call them, these new bosses, these people who rise up to be a boss.
Oh, the professional managerial.
Professional managerial grades. At one time, you had to do your training to become a train driver, to know the rules and regs in your own time. So the unions helped set up this thing called the Mutual Improvement Class, the MIC. Then we got it as part of your contract. You were paid. It was part of your... You went to a training school. You were taught properly and paid to learn. You weren't doing it in your own time with a torch under your bed sheets or whatever. That's what you have to do. Once that happened, we should have stopped it. But they carried on the mutual improvement classes, and what they became was a breeding ground for managers who were taught then how to work against the unions, and they become bosses. I think that's gone now, and it's probably golf societies has taken place, I think, now, the way it works. But in Batley and Spen, I enjoyed going there. I wanted to go and see for myself what's happening. I loved the atmosphere, I loved the feeling of the people around. And talking to Chris, he'd been there a few days earlier, he told me, he says, you know, oh, with George Galloway, and we were going to this house, and there were kids in a swimming pool, paddling pool in garden, and they introduced him to the kids. Said, look, this is George Galloway, he's been on Big Brother. Now you look at the blue-suited, pointy-shoed hair product brigade, and they'll take the piss out of him for that. But I tell you what, the working class people we're supposed to represent, whether you like Big Brother or not, and I've never seen it, that is what our people want. That's the culture of the people we're supposed to represent and look after. So anyway, I think a good campaign was run, and I enjoyed being there and glad to be a part of it. But another reason I wanted to be there is Nicky and I were sitting councillors in Doncaster, Labour councillors, trying to do the best for our community. The biggest battle we had was with the Labour group. One example of that, I was dragged in front of the whips. I took my trade union rep with me, by the way. I was dragged in front of the whips for talking to the press and giving a statement in line with party policy. In fact, it was basically a text that Corbyn had sent me that morning, and I put it in. It's party policy, but some members don't like it. And in a place like Doncaster, where Labour, a red rosette gets you elected normally, except for when we had Donegate, let's not forget what a balance it sits on. What we have is people in the Labour group who, if they lived in a Tory stronghold, would be members of the Tory party. They ain't got a socialist bone in their body. And trade unions have got to take some responsibility for that, not just in council chambers, but in Parliament as well. And the European Parliament, when we were part of that. Because to start, well, I think they're changing it now, aren't they? But to hold office, public office, on behalf of the Labour Party, you have to be a member of an affiliated union. And unions have been giving cards of fucking convenience to people who ain't got a trade union bone in their body. Never have had, and never will have. You should be a trade unionist first. A trade unionist first. And then you should, if you're going forward, that's the way forward, then your union should support you. Now some trade unions have used it despicably. I don't mind saying that. I love trade unions, I love the trade union movement. I'm positive about what I've seen in Unite, I'm positive about what I'm seeing in Unison. And one of the guys I grew up with as well, he was a guy in Doncaster who really inspired me. I loved him to bits. He always took me under his wing, was Rodney Bickerstaff. Now he was the first general secretary of NUPE, the first general secretary of Unison. And I'll tell you, Rodney had the honour of making him an honorary member of ASLEF just before he died. He'd be turning in his grave at what's happening in Unison right now, I believe. But that's for the Unison members to sort out. And I think the majority of the left on the executive committee there now, and Paul Holmes, who hopefully will be able to take up his rightful place as the elected president, will sort that out. And I'm looking forward to being with him next Saturday at the Red Shed. And if you can get anywhere to support him, please, please do that. So, we don't want to just put people forward into Parliament. We need to have people who are trade unionists. And a story. In Doncaster, round our area, South Yorkshire, there was a massive trades councils used to take place. We had big groups, and one of the big industrial unions, I'm not going to mention its name, had somebody they wanted to be a branch secretary somewhere. You know, what unions tended to do, be honest, anybody who was really any good, we kept them for ourselves. They moved forward in the union movement. If they weren't that good, but they attended every meeting, they did what was wanted of them, they went to Labour Party branches for us and stuff like that and stuck their hand up at the right time, but they weren't good enough for the union movement, we stuck them in Labour Party. And I'll tell you this story, and it's true. I won't mention names, but I'll tell you the story, it's true. There was a guy that one of the big industrial unions wanted to be a branch secretary of that union somewhere, a branch secretary of the union. And he didn't get elected. The members didn't think he were up to it. So as a consolation prize, they used their block vote to make him an MEP. I'm not kidding, it's serious. Now, if we're going to be serious about changing society, for our people, for working people, we need to take it seriously. And we need to use, I don't think politics takes place in Parliament. I don't think it takes, I know it doesn't take place in council chambers, certainly not in Doncaster. And I don't think it takes place in the Senate or any other parliament around. I think it takes place on the streets and in the communities. We need to be building in the communities again. There are communities crying out for help. And we've got to be not too big to go and speak to some of the people who are struggling most, who need it most. Like I said, the guys delivering pizzas and stuff on a scooter in all weathers. People who are working 0 hours contracts. People in care homes who are working. We need to be working and talking to them and engaging with them. There's no other way. We had in Doncaster, Care UK, I don't remember the dispute, took place at Care UK. Unison did a good job there fighting for them. They come to work one day and the signs had changed from NHS to Care UK. The same colour, it looked like National Service. And they said, we don't alter your pay. They kept the same rate of pay, but they lost all the other parts that went with it. They took a massive pay cut on the take-home pay. They stood up and they fought against it and got some victory, not all, because we should all stand with them at times like that. Now, when I started on railway, 79, the year Thatcher got elected, and every day we worked coal trains from pit to power station, every day. One day a week, the job I was on, I used to take coal trains to Immingham, the deep sea port at Immingham, where we exported it all over the world. I'll tell you one of the saddest days I remember. But when I went to the deep sea port of Immingham, it had been changed from a place where we unloaded coal to be exported to one where we loaded it that had been imported. And you know what we had to do after that point? The coal that came from cheap labour countries wasn't good enough to burn in the power stations. So we used to take trainloads of imported coal to collieries to be mixed with coal, British coal, that could be burnt in the power stations. What nonsense is that? And now you get Johnson saying, we took the lead in being green. Margaret Thatcher shut the pits, she was ahead of the game. There's nothing green about shutting pits here and importing coal from other side of the world that you then have to mix with coal from Britain to burn in power stations. There's no green about that. Johnson's a liar. He's an horrible liar. And I often say, the things that Thatcher did, I hated it, and I used to set my alarm clock an hour earlier than I needed, just so I could hate her for an hour longer. Well, that is nothing to how I feel about Keir Starmer. Yeah. Nothing to how I feel about that. I'll give her some credit, you don't very often hear me talking favourably about that bastard Thatcher. She represented her class. Yeah. She represented her class. I believe Corbyn would have represented our class. I now believe he should have been stronger and harder, but that might have took some of the mystique away from him, if you like. I don't know. But we are where we are. Starmer and his ilk, the blue suited, air gel and pointy shoe brigade, they have nothing in common with us. They don't want to represent us. They want to make the Parliament like it was under Blair, where it's the Tory second team that can be brought in for business, for the Murdochs of this world and such. That's all they want to do. And I'll tell you what, I left the Labour Party. Nicky left the Labour Party before me. And I'll tell you what, it's sad. Nicky. I do not see a way back for the Labour Party. But what I do think as well, we need a movement. A movement, I don't know if there's a number of parties around, including this party, which I love, I think they're great. But we need a movement bigger than any of the parties we've got now. When Corbyn stood, I was proud we were the first to nominate him as a trade union. We'd come to nominations for Mayor of London, Deputy Leader and Leader at Labour Party. We met, didn't we? The EC met, we decided for Mayor of London we'd support Sadiq Khan, we'd nominate him. Deputy Leader, we decided we'd nominate Tom Watson. This is when we thought he was good. You know, he'd been exposing Murdoch and all that, dial him for murder, and so we thought he was alright. So we nominated him. And we couldn't, as much as we tried, we couldn't nominate for leader. Corbyn wasn't in the race by this point. And we looked at the others. I think maybe if we'd have gone for somebody, it would have been Andy Burnham. But none of them stood out. We couldn't choose the tallest at 7 dwarfs, is what we said at that time. So we didn't nominate. A national union affiliated to the Labour Party couldn't nominate any of the candidates for leader. And that, I think, made quite a statement. Anyway, eventually Corbyn was talked into standing. He got the amount of nominations he needed. We reconvened an EC meeting, and as president it was the quickest meeting I'd ever chaired. It was moved and seconded that we nominate Jeremy Corbyn, carried unanimously, hammer down, we were in pub, weren't we? Simple as that. That's how easy it went. And there was never any choice of anything else happening. But the strikes you talked about, and I'm sure everybody can come up with strikes and things that's happened and were part of our history that made a big point. The steel workers before the miners, I think, was one of the disputes as well. That was, it made a big part of our history and where we got to. But I can't be here and not talk about the 1982 flexible rostering dispute that ASLEF was involved in. It was the end of the 8-hour day. It made us move from 7 to 10 hours. We went on strike for that. We were having single days out, then we went on all-out strike. Thatcher had threatened that she was going to shut the railway down, or the chairman of the British Railway Board decided they were going to shut the railways down. Full stop, lock us out. We stuck out there. The TUC had passed a resolution that any union falling foul of the new anti-trade union legislation, the government would feel, or the employer would feel the full weight of the trade union movement behind them. We were waiting for that support to come. What happened is Len Murray came out of the TUC and basically said, you better get back to work, lads. The Falkland Islands had just finished, the ships were coming in, you could see them on the telly, the ships coming in back into the harbours, with banners on, call off the rail strike or we'll call an air strike. And that's in the triptych painted in our head office, still painted by Mick Jones, Jack Jones's son, the great international brigader and union leader of our time. That's things that happened, many things that was built up to. I believe that set the way for the miners' strike as well. Now I'm proud, so proud, that certainly in Yorkshire, in South Yorkshire, we never moved a shovel full of coal in that strike, with the exception of the trains that were given dispensation from the NUM that were going to like field nursing homes and stuff like that. And what we used to do, we'd bring the train out, we'd stop before we left the sidings, and we'd tell the miners who were picking coal, help yourself, we'll give you a whistle on horn when it's time for us to go, and they were getting as much coal off of it as they could themselves. And it was crap coal to burn on an open fire, but it was better than note that they had. So we worked them. We had a judgment. We found you didn't have to actually have a physical picket line, because we refused to cross one near Immingham Docks where there was a banner put across the bridge over the railway line. They couldn't be bothered to be there all the time, and we refused to cross it, and it actually went to court, and it was a notional picket line. And it's in law, that notional picket line, you don't have to cross it. That was fantastic. You know, Orgreave, it's the time I was growing up, I was in WC. I'd actually had an hernia operation, and I lived in Armthorpe, the mining village of Armthorpe where Markham Main is, and I used to, while I recuperated, it's keyhole day surgery now, it wasn't then, and lads up the street, miners are up the street, they used to get £2 a day to go picketing, and if they had a full car of 4, they got an extra £2 to cover petrol. So I used to go and make the 4 up with them. I could hardly walk at the time, so go and make the, so they'd all get the £2, I'd get one which I'd give to them, and they'd get the £2 for petrol as well. And I remember trying to get into Nottinghamshire, being turned back all the time, Now I didn't go to Orgreave, but I know that when they went to Orgreave, they were just allowed through. They were almost guided to Orgreave for that battle that took place. It was awful, awful to see. People got their heads beat. You know John Dunn as well as I do. The back of his head caved in, and yet it was supposedly his fault. How do you get back of your head caved in when it's your fault? Yeah, prosecuted. Awful. The miners' strike we wanted, but the same police force with Hillsborough, South Yorkshire Police, awful, awful police force. I don't think it's got much better now. We had people in the village of Armthorpe, the village one day I'm coming home from work and the village is sealed off. You couldn't get in for police in the village. Nobody could get in, nobody could get out. It was awful. Mind you, they did have a concrete plinth outside the gates, and when the snow was down and it was Christmas time, they actually built a snowman over one of the police vans went into it. There's also another story where they run into this house, and the woman let them through, the pickets run through, into the garden. Some coppers followed them, and there were a bunch of miners there, which really got their own back for Orgreave on them as well. So good things happened at that time. Now, I don't know where this is going to end up with where the Labour Party is going now. I don't know how it's going to end up, but I do know we have to understand that that is not the way forward. We had the chance. We had our 1948 moment, and it was sabotage. People we were employing, they sabotaged us. We'll not see that Ford report, I don't believe. It'll be buried. Won't see it. But listen, let's get out in communities. As trade unionists, let's not just represent people for more money, which is very important, something you have to do. And about politicising trade unionists and workers, the best way you can do that is deliver decent conditions for them, decent pay for them, be there for them when you need them, and organise other things outside that. You know, unions organise social dues. It's all about that. It's not all about literal politics. It's about the politics of people as well. You know, I love to hear the stories from the older guys of what they went through. I love when I hear about how in the Communist Party, Bob Crow was mentioned after that. There was one time, I was a mate of Bob's for many, many years. We used to be both young members at Communist Party in the day, and we used to be in there. And in the rail aggregates, we were seen as these two young tearaways. In fact, there's another guy, Pete Sowden, who died very young. The three of us were seen as young tearaways. Everybody else was at least a generation older than us at that time, you know. But people come along. It's not just Bob that made that possible. It's the way him and others on LUL and London Underground worked and organised, and then organised in the wider RMT. It's not just Scargill that did it. It's the way the NUM used to meet and organise. And I know the Yorkshire NUM, where Scargill said he was the president at Yorkshire NUM, they used to meet, the left there used to meet in a pub in Barnsley called the Junction, which unfortunately is no longer there now. But my history, it's in my blood, it's the way I was brought up. I will never forget the miners' strike. I'll never forget the stories that my grandfather told me about 1926. They did that so our generation would never see it. We're seeing it now. And I guess in some ways, it's worse now. Because the expectations are higher. They had very low expectations in 1926. They wanted to get better. They wanted to have a decent living standard. Now we've seen decent living standards being taken away from us. When we're going to see £20 a week, £80 a month, taken off some of the poorest people in this society, while the Tories are sticking money into the mates on contracts without going through any kind of due process, without caring. They don't care. Half of the contracts are no good and don't work. But they're going to take 20 quid a week, £80 a month from some of the poorest people in society. That's where we need to be standing. Yeah. That's where we need to be standing. Let's not get too engrossed in the intellectual stuff. Let's do it from here, from heart, are you told? Because if you start talking, if you go into some council estates or some of these estates where we represented, and we represented some of the estates that had nothing in Doncaster, nothing. You go and start talking about some intellectual stuff that's wonderful, and we should all read this stuff in these books, but start talking to people on streets about that, people at the lowest level, it's over their heads. They're worrying about where the next bit of food's coming from. And I just finish on this, one of the things that really got to me. In a Labour council, you have a cabinet and a directly elected mayor in Doncaster. Everything is done by them. They don't even tell the members in the area where they're doing stuff. Now we represented Town Ward, which took in the town centre and some very, very deprived areas around it. Very deprived areas where they couldn't even get the basic stuff. They didn't even have a low-cost supermarket. People there, not many of them didn't have transport. You know, they get nothing. They're treated with nothing. And yet, because I know there's been cuts to the council's funding, and other stuff's made available. And they go and get funding from outside to do massive projects around the train station, to do massive projects around what they call the civic quarter with new theatres and stuff. And yet just across the road, they can't get a paving slab fixed. You know, just because money's available there, you don't have to take it. Not when you've got people with nothing who can't get the basics done, and yet you go cap in hand to government for money to do some grand project. It's fur coat and no knickers, isn't it? Yeah. We need to look after people and stop trying to be... Doncaster is a fantastic market town. Its market charter goes back to King John or somebody. It's really odd. It was actually still part of Scotland as well. We were given to Scotland by one king, and it's never been repealed. Now, that suits me, being a McDonald, brought up by McDonald, married to a Mackenzie. It suits me down to the ground. But you know, let's look after the people that we need to look after, because there's nobody else going to do it. The Tories aren't going to do it. Let's look after them. Let's get back to some basics, and I'm not talking the back to basics. Let's start looking after our class, our people. And if you see somebody in a blue suit, I'm trying to finish, but I'm going to say one more thing. I used to be involved in an organisation called Winning Labour. There was me, there was John Trickett, there was Richard Bergen before he was an MP, there was Michael Meacher, a number of Tim Roach before he was General Secretary at GMB as well.
He went bad, didn't he?
It's all of it, isn't it? Yeah. But what we're trying to do, we're going around the country trying to get working class people into Parliament, trying to get them as candidates. Because we realised the problem was there then. 3% are industrial workers, 3% now. So we were trying to do that. And I once made a speech at a fringe we did. So looked, every young person who come up to platform, they come up, they'd all got suits on up to here, they've got neatly combed hair and suits. And they made the same speech, which talked about somebody in my constituency, let's call them Rosie. It could have been any name, but it's exactly the same speech written by the same people. And I said, look, you go out, go into a takeaway, go into a bar. You don't see people like that. You see people with brightly coloured hairs, tattoos, people with, you don't see these fancy haircuts, you see all kind of weird haircuts. Some people don't even get their haircut. And I think you should all join my campaign not to get your hair cut until all barbers have been brought into public ownership. That was happening. And we know we got away from that. I think we got away from that under COVID. And you saw people getting up to the platform, brightly coloured, just like going out around town on Saturday night. You saw all kinds of things there. That's normal. That's normal. It's not normal to be done up in a suit and tie and all of a sudden get a London accent or something. That's not normal. So, I wish you well tomorrow as well. It's great to be invited, and I hope you realise your party, how lucky you are to have people like Andy Hood from ASLEF and Jason from the TSSA, rail workers, because I know from both of them, Andy in particular works so closely, Jason I know from times at Labour Party conference. I think he should grow his beard again. You're looking too normal, mate. Try and stand out. So thanks ever so much for the invite. I'm just one last thing, sorry. I think I started to get into this. But the Labour Party, coming up for elections in May, we had to stand, sitting councillors had to go through interviews and fill in forms to get on panel. Sitting councillors. 5 didn't get through. Now Nicky was on the LCF, Labour campaign forum, local campaign forum, and questioned the form that was being put out. You needed a degree almost to fill it in. Somebody like me would struggle, but I get help. Now 5 sitting councillors, experienced councillors, didn't get through that and onto the panel. All of them, industrial workers. All of them, who weren't used to this form filling in. When Nicky raised it, a good comrade that we pushed, we hoped something good was going to come out of it, and maybe it still will. But when Nicky questioned it, what about people filling these forms in? What about people who haven't got the skills? Somebody piped up, well, if they can't fill it in, we'll give them training. Not understanding, if you need training to fill a form in, there's something wrong with the fucking form, not that you need to train people. But she piped up, this young woman, we had so much hope for and put so much into her. She turned around and she said, if they can't fill a form in, they don't deserve to be a councillor. Well, that'd be me out. Anyway, Nicky didn't stand. The 2 of the 5 who didn't get through were going to appeal. I said, well, I'll come with you to the regional board. One dropped out of that, he'd had enough. The other one did go. We got him through onto the panel. He's been elected again as a councillor. The bullying he went through, it was a virtual meeting, the bullying he went through was unbelievable. And because my literacy skills are crap, I always say, can I record this? So I've got the full recorded thing. He went through hell. Now he got on there and he got through that. That was the Yorkshire and Humber Regional Labour Party, regional board. Wouldn't let people through because they couldn't fill a fucking form in. And yet when Batley and Spen comes up as an election, they go and find somebody who's not even a member, who they think might be able to bring some popularity with them because of a dead sister. Not a member, not a socialist, no right to have even been in that election. That's why I come to Batley and Spen to help and campaign there and see what was happening. And now they're making that the norm. You won't have to be a Labour Party member to be a candidate. And the unions have to take some responsibility for that with all the cards of convenience to get to it. I'm going to sit down because I'm getting dry and I know I've got over the time.